Hi, and welcome to another episode of Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Today I wanted to focus on that specifically, the label atheist, and I guess not specifically in a way, and talk just about labels in general. This is inspired by a debate that I had earlier this week in a more political environment where I was debating with a person about terminology in his use of the word statist, which I don't need to get too into the details of what the word itself really means, but or is intended to mean. But in essence, it's used by libertarians, minarchists, and anarchists to describe people who do not think like them. And I think that that is the best way to bring up the point I was trying to make with that topic and what I'd like to discuss today in the essence of labeling, what it should be used for, what it shouldn't be used for, and what it even justifiably can be used for. So with that, I want to bring in my wonderful co-host and linguist who should really be able to contribute a lot to this conversation, the unconventional pastor, Bob Graves. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Greg. Good to be back here again with you. I got to tell you that as we do more and more of these shows, I just look forward to it every week. We have a great time, and I hope that others get the impression that although you and I do have some fundamentally different biases and points of view, it is amazing how awesome it is to be able to talk about these things back and forth in different ways. It's really amazing.
I absolutely agree. I think that this show is the highlight of my week in many ways. I love getting the opportunity to. I plan for it throughout the week and think about it, and it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. And especially the times when you and I can nuance different points and don't necessarily agree on things. And I think there might be a little bit of that today. I don't know. That's another thing that's fun is that Bob and I don't plan these shows ahead of time, so it I don't know, or I mean, we don't plan with each other, so I don't know your position on this one, Bob. So I guess the statement that I made, and I ended up being blocked on Facebook by this person, but in the end, is that I thought it was inappropriate and not conducive to good conversation to use a label like statist or any other similar label. And to make a similar label, let's say. Um, Even just the term theist to mean anybody who's not an atheist. If I start labeling people as theists who would not self-identify in such a way, if I say, well, you're not an atheist, so you're a theist, so I'm going to use that term to describe you. Um, I think that it's an abuse in a way. It's a bullying factor or a bullying tactic, and that it should be avoided to try to press your labels onto other people. And that's the point I was trying to get at. And I thought it was ironic that in the end, that person just decided to block me and essentially couldn't accept what I was saying. So took his ball and went home, I think.
Yeah.
But,
Um,
um,
when it comes to the concept of labels and things like that, this is one of those areas, and there are many, where I think that as a culture, we have this tendency to see a problem, and we always want to solve the problem as if the problem exists where we see it, rather than as if where we see it is the manifestation of the problem. It's like the squeaky wheel might need to be oiled, but then again, maybe the squeaky wheel is really being caused by a bent axle, and the real solution is to fix the axle. And that if you can't see the axle, then the squeaky wheel is the only awareness you have of the problem, as it were. And I think that we have a tendency to just automatically think that every problem we're aware of somehow exists at the level at which we're aware of it. And I think that cognitive dynamic is part of where the abuse of labels occurs. Because I would certainly be one as a linguist who would argue that we can't live without labels. We can't communicate without labels. All words are actually a label. Every word is a signifier that makes a reference to a domain of meaning that is called upon by the use of that word. And there's a sense in which every word is a label for the domain of meaning that it's been assigned to. We can't think, we can't work, we can't communicate without these labels. But the labels are reference to a domain of meaning. The domain of meaning is something else entirely. If you follow what I'm saying.
I do. And I think that that speaks to an important point, but it's not really the one I was trying to get at. I see. I mean, this is actually
Mhm.
what the initial comment that I made on this was that statist is a made up word by anarchists and libertarians to describe people who disagree with them. And the retort came, well, all words are made up. And I think that that's essentially what you're saying there as well, is that the labels are all indeed, they're artifacts. They're created by us to they're referentials for a
The,
domain of meaning.
they're
And that's
tools.
absolutely true. The question
Yeah.
I have more is in the motive and the usage on an ethical level.
Right. Well, when a label becomes a cause for dismissal, I mean, as you even mentioned the thing about theist, the label theist, when it comes down to being a theist, in the appropriate, say, anthropological sense of the term, theists come in so many different shapes, sizes, concepts, beliefs that to simply bundle them as if they're really one group or one genre is a bit silly and naive. And consequently, if one thinks that they can, say, dismiss a statist or a theist or anything, without really evaluating how well somebody might fit into the reasons, it's basically trying to operate without really thinking or without really interacting. It's not treating the person as a person. In fact, I think it's impossible for you and I to have the relationship that we have without us understanding a certain set of words that we use to talk about each other. And yet, part of the reason why I think we have a good relationship is because we're not necessarily holding each other to our concept of each other. We're talking and allowing ourselves to be surprised at how we do and don't fit into the various ways we might have used words to describe us. Is that you connecting with that?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that's very much the point that I was trying to make, and I think uh, the other thing that I wanted to nuance about that is it upsets me when people look at labels and say in a dichotomous sense. So, for example, theist and atheist. A lot of people will go out and say, well, I'm agnostic or something, so I'm not a theist or an atheist. Well, that's not true, because the words are designed in such a way to be a dichotomous set. They comprehend. I'm sorry, it's comprehensive and mutually exclusive. There is nothing that
They
is not either
exaggerate the
one of the other and can be
contrast
both.
for purposes of clarity. And then when we take it seriously, we're
Right,
really
exactly.
living
And
in an
that's, but
exaggerated
what we need
illusion.
to recognize is that what we're doing with the label specifically, again, we can focus on theist and atheist, is very, very clear and specific. Even if we look at the construct in Greek, is that it is theist and not theist. This is the a and not
Mhm,
a category. So for somebody
mhm.
as a theist to describe, and I mean, I could do the same thing with not theist and theist. I mean, to
Yeah.
go from the opposite is also true.
Right.
But for somebody to take the position that not what I am is any sort of descriptive term is
It
fundamentally
reminds
flawed.
me of something that George Takei said recently. You may have even seen this. He said, "There's two kinds of people in this world. One are people who are able to extract information from incomplete data."
I like that.
I thought it was brilliant. uh, he's a funny guy.
And that it, I guess that's what I wanted to get at with this particular part of this discussion is where to not use labeling. And I bring it up, and I know I'm pontificating here a bit, and I apologize for that.
Now,
But
when you
I'm
say use labeling, explain what you mean by that. You mean abuse it or use it?
I mean to abuse it now, right? Well, I'm
Huh.
saying don't use it in this way because it
Right,
is abusive. Is sort of
right.
the argument that I'm making, in that for anybody to in any situation to invent a term to describe anybody that is not like them is immediately making a division in their own mind. And that's an
It can be very
appropriate thing to do
presumptive.
if it helps you make sense of things.
Yeah.
However, to take that outside of your own personal perspective and to then start applying that label externally and using it to the people who would be in that category is when you've gone from the realm of just simple understanding using labels and abusing using labels.
Have you ever had a disagreement with someone where part of what they come back at you with is, oh, but you said, and then they say, and so that means what you're saying is, and they want to take what they understand to be the meaning of words to be your position, and they demonstrate no interest in knowing what you might have meant by using those words. And have you ever had that kind of a situation?
I think we've actually had that kind of a situation recorded right here on the place before.
Yeah, you know, yes, but it is a strange thing because words are in some ways slippery reference. They, as what we've said, words are a reference to a domain of meaning, which means that they're in and of themselves broad, overly so, and imprecise, and they take on a greater precision based upon context, other words that they've been used in conjunction with. And this is why real communication requires more than just one word. You know, those are we just say one or two words and we would have successfully communicated, and it doesn't work that way. Um, you know, and as a result, whenever anybody is using a word, it is absurd, or well, it's immature and perhaps naive to think that you know precisely where within the potential domain of meaning that that word can point to, that they're pointing to, you know, and then holding them to it. Um, it's really kind of immature.
That's a fair point, but I did want to look on the opposite perspective is that I think that people don't necessarily examine their own usage of terms sometimes to recognize, and this is the
Yeah,
argument I was making, to recognize the motive of the term.
right.
Now, I think that there's a difference between intended meaning and the reasoning behind the intended meaning or the reason that you chose to use that word in that respect. And that was the point I was trying to get at. When somebody if somebody wants to be, and in this case, it was a libertarian using the term statist to describe people who are not libertarian. That's fine if that helps them understand. I mean, it's a categorical phrase, but when it is used in a sense that makes it pejorative and is applied as a label in conversation to somebody who they're saying, well, you're a statist, so you would think like that, um, would be I think that that's where we need to, or even statists think like that, and implying that you're part of that category. We need to recognize that when they're doing that, that is not coming from a position of sincerity.
Well, no, and I would even go further, and I would say this: if you cannot think like a statist and also think unlike, like if you can't think like a non-statist, you're not thinking enough. I think that when we look at situations, particularly politically, I think we need to honestly seek to appreciate what sense there might be in a wide variety of different perspectives. To pick one perspective and then condemn all the others simply because it doesn't agree with the angle I'm using is really nothing but painting a person into a corner. One of the reasons why I say if you are a liberal, you're narrow minded. If you are a conservative, you're narrow minded. You should be able to be comfortable thinking things through with a liberal perspective, realizing that that liberal perspective is neither right nor wrong. It is simply a way of looking at an issue. Same thing with being conservative. It is neither right nor wrong. It is a lens through which one can seek to make sense of the political environment. Same thing is true of being libertarian. It is neither right nor wrong as a lens. It is simply a lens. But when people narrow themselves down to a single lens, and judge all the other lenses based upon the fact that it's not the lens that I use, they begin to just turn everything into an I'm not listening to you form of spin. And I consider this is why religion and politics can become so narrow minded. Whereas I think, not to say that we want to just have nothing that we can nail down to the floor, but I'm sorry, life doesn't work through just one lens. And sometimes we have to find the balance in the conundrum of lenses.
There's a quote. I was trying to look it up just now as you were talking, but it really, I think, embodies what you're saying beautifully. And basically, it says that it's a point of maturity, or it's evidence of maturity, to be able to entertain an idea without agreeing with it. That
Socrates,
it's
yeah.
that is the sign of an educated mind. I forget exactly how it's
Yeah, that's basically
phrased.
it. Yeah.
And I think that that's absolutely true. That again, I am an atheist. I do not believe that there is a God, but that doesn't mean that when I do a Bible study with my friend, the Jehovah's Witness, every conversation that we have is about whether or not God exists. We have to be able to entertain a notion as if it is true, to be able to
Yes.
extrapolate anything from that point of view, to understand it in any way. And that's I don't
I
even
took
understand
shared
how
this with you once
comprehension is
before,
possible
and I
without
think
that.
you'll probably remember it. But I bet it was an awesome experience for me. I took a speech class where we had to practice many different kinds of speeches. This was in a college speech class, and one of the speeches, it was more of a debate kind of thing that we had to do. We had to find someone in the classroom with whom we genuinely disagreed. And then we had to have a conversation with each other in front of the class where we took the other person's point of view and expressed it in a way they felt was fair, honest, and well stated. That was really hard to do. And the experience of doing it was, for me, just a broadening experience. And it was a brilliant teacher who had us do this. I was just so impressed with it.
I'll bet that sounds like a really interesting.
It's not easy.
No, I can imagine it's not. We've actually played at that a little bit with some of our production meetings and talking about
Yes.
doing shows
Yeah.
where we entertain notions. And Joey and I, with the show we just did, I asked him to defend an idea that he does not believe to be true, and it was, I mean, in the end, I think that he made a spectacular failure in doing so. That really nuanced the fact that we do not, neither of us agree with that point of view. And it made it very difficult. I don't think I could have done any better than Joey did in trying to defend that, because neither of us agreed with it. And it would have been a sincere accomplishment if either of us had been able to do more, but we're limited by our ability to understand perspectives that other people come from. And
Yeah.
that's something we need to recognize coming into these. But
There are
we do have a
some
viewer
people
comment
who
that
are
I,
very gifted at persuasion and at rhetoric. And these are people who can sometimes win an argument. And then later, when they change their mind, they can win that argument too.
it's one thing that I've always found really interesting, and specifically it happens in debates with apologists, and very frequently in the presuppositional apologist stance, is people who are so willing to attack something that they believe to be absolutely true, such as the validity of logic itself. And I find that really, I mean, it's been thrown at me over and over and over that, well, how do you know that logic is even valid, that it's accurate in any way, that it's representative of reality? And I don't understand why we even need to have that conversation, because the only
Right,
way
right. Yeah, I
to
hear you. Yeah.
the only way you
I
can even
think it
defend
shows
that
a
is using the
naivete in
very
ever
thing that,
having to experience the concept of axiomatic assumptions that when you falsely hold on to an illusion that you think gives you a foundation, you don't experience the frustration of realizing uh we've got to create a foundation here. And you need to do that. When it comes to logic, there are certain axioms that we have finally come to, and as you've mentioned this, it's because we find that things are have to be necessarily so, or there's nothing at all that we can do in even moving on from here.
Right. There's things that simply need to be accepted, or nothing can be done.
Yeah, or nothing can be accepted, honestly.
Right. We
Yeah.
have a couple viewer comments on the subject of I guess the topic at hand here. One of them, I think it's beautiful. It says, "The older I get, the more," or let me make sure I'm reading this correctly. "The more that most people who I disagree with have begun to sound like they're just using a bunch of fancy words that ultimately come down to telling me to shut up." I
That's
think that's
true.
wonderful, and it's very true. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say this to some extent, but I've certainly been guilty of that in the past. I believe
Yeah.
I've learned to check myself a bit more, but I used to be really good at trying to basically just intimidate people out of conversations by talking over their head, or using terms that I knew full well that they wouldn't be familiar with because they had no justifiable reason to be familiar with. So it's
When
not even talking over their head in a condescending fashion.
when I was a
In
fundamentalist, I think I was pretty good at really seeking to construct a workable or believable argument for holding to the various things that I held on to. And I don't think that at the time I was aware of how much I was seeking to find a way of thinking where the end was contained in the beginning. And yet the odd thing is that when I learned to just give that up, more to embrace the things that perhaps are without having to spin them into something different. Not to say that anyone ever really achieves that fully, but when I became more open to trying to understand things as they are rather than trying to cram them into a paradigm, I find that I get more accused of spinning words or of deceiving. The Bible believing Christians, when they hear me teach some things from the Bible, it is amazing to me how they can totally deny the unequivocal truths of science or of linguistics when dealing with a word or dealing with culture or dealing with history, and and all because I end up saying something that has some perhaps academically founded force behind it, and they see it as spin, and they don't realize how much, when I used to hold on to that view, how much of it was really built on a real need to spin the end into the beginning. And
I
it's just a
can't
strange thing.
make a comment on that other than saying thank you for bringing more about that to the table. That was beautiful. As a matter of fact, I was reading one of those very situations just moments ago on Facebook, seeing a discussion that you were part of, going through
You
that
know, I
frustration.
sometimes I don't know whether to continue them or have them or not, because they're just silly, um, silly things. And sometimes I pursue those conversations just to see how far they go. And I've discovered they never end. They just never end. There's nothing that you can say to a close-minded um fundamentalist. There's nothing you can say to them. They will come back and they'll accuse you of being deceived and, inspired by Satan, a lover of the devil or whatever. No matter what you say, they will not acknowledge anything that is verifiable, that challenges them, nor will they acknowledge anything in their own behavior. And it is amazing to me that, particularly if you come on strong to them in a manner that threatens what they believe, reason just goes right out the window. And it just, there's no way to deal with it. There really isn't. And so sometimes I just play it through to see where it goes, and it just rarely goes anywhere.
And that actually, the next conversation or the next viewer comment here elucidates that a little bit more. It's most people's tactic in winning a debate is merely to pretend like they've won, no matter what you say. I think that's wonderful. Thank you. And here's another one. Some people deserve to be spoken to with words they don't understand because they're trying to make an argument in a field of study that they obviously don't understand. This phenomena
Yes.
happens almost infinitesimally
I
within the realm
I
of biblical
deliberately do
studies.
that sometimes with people who are arrogant. I'll begin talking over their head, um, in a way where I'm trying to do two things. One is I'm trying to give them the option of discovering that they haven't even got a clue what the nomenclature is. Or number two, I want to use the nomenclature in an accurate way so that people familiar with what I'm saying will actually be able to see just how stupid and ridiculous the argument is that's coming back at me. And I realize it's not a lovey-dovey technique, but sometimes in dealing with difficult people, it's difficult to know, where are the lines to be drawn, and to realize also that we were talking about this on the Hangout the other night. There comes a point in time where certain points of view are dangerous and damaging to other people, and they need to be confronted.
Hmm.
So it's uh, and where exactly does that line get drawn is not the kind of thing I feel is definitively clear. Sometimes we have to experiment with it.
I think that that's an important note, and I think the other side of what I wanted to get into, we've got about 20 minutes left, so we're about halfway through the show here, is the positive side of labeling. And I guess when I'm talking about labels in this one, I wasn't clear enough at the beginning, but it's become more clear to me that what I was trying to say is personal labels, labels for people, and that's what I wanted to say is there's a positive function of using labels as well.
Mm,
Specifically, I start every show with, "Hi, I'm Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist." Now, the reason that I say that, as I've mentioned in the past, there's plenty of other labels that I could certainly go by. I'm a humanist. I'm a father. I'm a scientist. I'm a biologist. I'm a husband. I'm a man. It's there's I could certainly choose a label that would be more accurate even to what we're going to discuss in any given show. And sometimes when I just say I'm an atheist, it really doesn't even contribute anything to that particular conversation
right.
because we're not talking about anything where that's even relevant. But I choose that title for a reason, or that label for a reason. And that is because I want to positively identify as an atheist, because that label is used in a pejorative sense and it is understood to be a negative thing. And I think that it is wonderful when I've seen the LB, LGBTQ movement
Right.
adopting words like queer and gay and homo and all the other things that have been used to deride them for years and years and years, and have really embraced those and used them within themselves, and
Hmm.
put out gay pride marches and queer eye for the straight guy. These are doing remarkable things in making people confront these labels and their negative
It
ideas that
turns
they
them on
have
their
of
ear.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that?
It turns them on their ear. It just alters the way they have to be heard. And I agree with you. In fact, part of the my understanding as a linguist is that there's no such thing as a good or a bad word. Um, in fact, there's even no such thing as a derogatory word in that sense, in that it's really just a sound, but it's the associations we have given that word that make it derogatory, that make it a bad word, that make it something that can be used as a weapon. So by taking that sword and reshaping it into a plowshare, is just awesome. And it really reclaims the word so that it can't be used in a derogatory manner.
I think it's a wonderful thing, and people should consider doing it more. That's why I don't remember if it was this show last week or when we talked about The dangers of coming out, or of positively identifying, and that there are situations where somebody can't tell people, they can't identify with that label for fear of repercussion, or
Yeah.
for actual real known consequences that will happen from it. And That's why it's so important that people who do have the luxury of being able to do so stand up and take that hit. It might cost you, but I think that that's a sacrifice that we really need to um, need to
Yeah.
recognize the value of.
Yeah. Commend the pioneers who begin to take such a brave stance. I can't remember George Carlin talked about how, we, we, we shoot all the passive, loving, um, people who come to seek to try to change the world into a better place. It's amazing, It was George Carlin who, of course, he said it in a very indelicate way, you're talking about Martin Luther King and Jesus and Robert Kennedy, and then bam, right between the eyes. That's the way we treat people who are trying to turn the world into a better place. And
That's so absolutely true. I loved. There's a joke that I read recently about our first encounter with an alien race, and basically, these aliens, they land here on Earth, and they happen to land right by a group of Christian missionaries, and these missionaries, of course, are called to ask them right out the door, "Eh, are do you know, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? Do you know Jesus?" And they said, "Well, of course we know Jesus. He hangs out with us all the time." And they're like, "Well, what do you mean he hangs out with you all the time?" Like he basically lives at our planet. Yeah, bounces around a little bit from one planet to the other, but loves it. Dude loves donuts. We give him donuts all the time. Man, he really knows how to party. He brings some water, turns it all into wine. It's great. And they're like, "Why? I mean, you guys don't see him much." They're like, "Well, no. He was here once, 2,000 years ago." And they're like, "Well, what did you do to him?"
yeah, yeah, I like that.
it's,
Food for
you know,
thought.
we look at these things and we all want to change the world, but we all want to demonize the people who do it, or who actually do it, in such a way that it's an interesting conundrum of the human race.
I think it shows our in all honesty, I think it does show our sense of insecurity, an honest sense of insecurity. Life is a real risk, riskier than we want it to be, and I think it seduces us sometimes into trying to develop an illusion of more security than is responsible to hold on to, and that it causes us to anybody's going to upset the apple cart. Oh my God, we've got as much control over the horrible things that can happen as we can manage, and in fact, the only thing we want more of is what we think already works. And so it does show that the human race is still at and by that I'm part of it. We're still at a level of immaturity where we're really not all that confident that we do have what it takes to creatively and openly and genuinely consider our options to create a far better opportunity for all of us. And we're not there yet, you know.
Someday we can hope to.
I think we're closer to it today than we were, say, 1,000 years ago. And I think that we're getting, think about it today. There's a lot of Christians who would talk about how we need to be absolutely loving and speak in love and do all of this, and they talk about love a lot, but yet they will still claim to hold on to the faith that was the faith of the Crusaders. That they don't necessarily want to be honest that some of the traditions they believe in were traditions that led the church through some of its most violent periods. And but they don't necessarily subscribe to that same violence. I think that as time goes on, Whereas I think that back in the days of that violence would have very much have been justified. You know, well, of course we have to kill these people; they're heretics. And things like that. But I think that that distance is growing until finally, there'll come a point where there'll be some needs to absurdly break the you know the traditions down far more, and not necessarily by turning your back entirely on them, but recognizing them for where they were at the stage of immature development of mankind.
That's a wonderful point about the development of mankind. I think I've been doing so many shows lately that they're starting to jumble together in my mind a bit. But did we talk about the or about Islam being? I don't even remember if that was on a show now or if that was
No,
just in
no,
my
it
life.
was in
But
a discussion where we're talking about how Islam came into existence some 600-700 years after Christianity, and that
yes,
its level of violence is somewhere where we were at 700 years ago.
yeah. Look where Christianity was 600 years ago, and consider that
The
we're doing.
Inquisition, burning at the stake, the Crusades. It's not a pretty past.
No, and perhaps this is part of the natural progression of a monotheistic religion, based on I don't know.
Yeah.
Who
Now,
knows?
some
It's an
people would
anthropological
correctly
question, but
point out, by the way, that that the that the Quran seems to have far more violent passages in it than, say, the Bible does. But at the same time, those writings came about during a time when the religious violence on the planet was at a real peak, and the Christian writings were written before Christianity ever got to the point that it could indulge itself in such violence. And so there's a sense in which I don't think that's a fair comparison, given the fact that both of those writings were produced in very different social contexts. Uh, you know,
yeah, I think that you're certainly right in that respect. But I don't know. I will look at it and say that regardless of the context in which it was written, we still need to recognize what actually is written, and how it is interpreted and applied today. I mean, we can hold
yes,
Christianity accountable for what it did 600 years ago, but none of those people are still around. Islam is around now doing these things that Christianity did 600 years ago, and we still need to recognize that they're horrible, and that they are fully justified by the text, or at least I can't even say the translation, because they,
right.
they believe their
Well,
text needs to be read
I,
in Arabic.
let
Um,
me risk saying something here that may be politically unpopular with some of our listeners. I believe that the reason why we condemn the Palestinians and not the Israelis, and I think we should condemn both of their violence um, equally. But the reason we condemn the Palestinians more than the Israelis is because the kind of violence they're only capable of, given their destitute situation, is a kind we can demonize far more than we would demonize the kind of militaristic violence that Israel is capable of. And I believe that part of the reason why we are inequitable in our condemning both sides for this violence is because we actually endorse more, as a Christian nation, supposedly, the concept that God gave Israel this land and commissioned them to commit genocide in getting rid of the Midianites and the Canaanites, and that they have the right to kill other people who are in their way because God gave them something. The whole concept is so ludicrous that I don't think we realize that in trying to justify our Christian heritage and the literalness of those claims, that it skews our mind to realize that, if you have a big, powerful military that's endorsed and financed by a ton of financial aid from a variety of other countries, and they're working to successfully take over land from people who were given a raw deal, who have nothing other than suicide bombing to defend themselves. It's very easy to try to say, well, look at how barbaric they're being. Well, I agree. This is terrible and barbaric, and it's awful violent. And this is not the way to solve the problem. But it's not as if, I'll tell you what, if you want to solve the problem of their barbarism, send them all kinds of military weapons and see what happens.
Right.
The
This is
violence makes
an
no sense. I
interesting
condemn
that
it on
we've come
both
sort of
sides.
full circle back to the initial topic at hand. It's the label statist. I think here is where I can identify a little bit more with that. Is when what you're talking about here is that the Palestinians don't have a state. They don't have that the power, the authority that comes with it, and the Israelis do. And the Israelis do because it was granted to them by
Right.
a decision via treaty after war, and that wasn't even related to the people who were in the place that they were given the land. So the people
And
that
there's a
were
lot of
there
people not around today
initially,
who fail to realize that part of the reason, one of the reasons why everyone was so favorable in giving them that sanction through the United Nations is that the truth was Europe was in some ways almost as anti-Semitic as Germany was, and this was a kind of a win-win way of thinking about what to do with the Jews so that we don't do with them what Hitler did. There was a significant level of anti-Semitism that laid behind allowing this Zionist position to prevail. And of course, I would also say that I think that Churchill and Eisenhower knew there's no way that that nation could become a nation without needing permanent military aid, and this was a way of guaranteeing we'd have a military base close to the oil.
I think that that's probably pretty accurate as well. I guess the argument that I wanted to make on this one though is that the again going from the label statist, this is somebody who says that I support, labeling me in such a way as to claim that I support a large state, a large government, and I mean this is coming from a minarchist, somebody who thinks that government should be as small as possible. And what I find interesting about that is that it fundamentally disregards the reality of my position. And I think that's where you were
Mm-hmm.
saying before is that I don't believe that a state or a large government is a good thing. I'm a biologist. I specialize in the theory of evolution, which is a competitive, adaptive, complex system. And I can tell you that the consequence of any, or it's sorry, the study of a type of competitive, adaptive, complex system, that the consequence of any competitive, adaptive, complex system is going to be larger and larger concentrations of power. And what we have in Israel with the Palestinians is that the Palestinians are outgunned. So either they will be eliminated, there will be a third party that intervenes, or they will get stronger and they will fight harder until they win. That's the only options that can have. They'll either come to a treaty between each other and come to a two-state solution or learn to live together. Or as long as there is a power struggle, we're going to have an escalation of forces. It's inevitable. It's not
It's
me saying that
insanity
it's a
too.
good thing. It's me observing that it's a fact. And that's where that label of statist is trying to tell me that it's trying to brand me as though I believe this is a good thing and to apply
Right.
that
Yeah.
onto
Now,
me in a
there
way
are
to
people.
then argue against a straw man that I never even brought to the table.
There are some people who want a more powerful government so the government can force upon the rest of us certain things they want forced on us. And it's amazing to me how some of the people who talk about a minimal government still want all kinds of government interference in terms of what they consider to be righteousness. you know, uh, it's amazing that as much as they don't want the government in our business, they want the government in all the business of everything they think other people are doing that they don't want people to do because of their own personal values, which is to me strange. But although there are some people who really do want a bigger government because they imagine that's the key to a utopia, I don't think. I think most people are probably somewhere in the middle. They don't. They want government to be big enough to do what it needs to do, but no bigger. And like when it comes to regulation, I don't want I don't want government regulation hampering business. But then again, I don't want ineffective regulation trusting businesses to do the honest thing when they don't, you know? So it's not as if there is a size that's the right size. Sometimes the size a government needs to be depends on the level of maturity, honesty, and ethics that exist in the people, you know. And if the people can't regulate themselves, someone's going to have to do it, or we're just going to crumble, you know. So it's not, and it's not as if more government involvement doesn't have a backside to it. It does, and so there's a sometimes where it's a choice of the lesser of two evils. It's not that easy, and this of course where those multiple lenses come in. You got to look at it this way, and you also got to look at it that way, and you got to realize you're making some compromises and some sacrifices and trying to find the balance.
I have to just agree on that, and I think I'm going to take a page out of Joey's book from earlier, and unless you have more that you'd like to add to this, I think I'm ready to wrap it up. I'm sorry to the viewers that I haven't had as much energy as I normally have. As I mentioned on the last show, it's been a long week for my family, my wife's family, and I'm
Oh
just
yeah.
tired. And I think that I think we've covered the topic at hand to the best that we
Well, maybe
could.
Joey can come up with a question and just send it to you quickly. Let's see if he's got, and then see if it can revive any sense of summary.
Well, I did want to say we have a viewer
Yeah.
comment that says, "Well said to you, Bob, about why we are inequitable toward Palestinians and Israelites." And I have to agree. I think that was a marvelous point that people don't necessarily recognize it as such when we look at these things from our very subjective viewpoints. So, good point on that. But it doesn't look like there's anything else coming in from Joey. So, with that, I will remind our viewers to stick around for the unconventional pastor that follows this with, of course, my wonderful co-host, Bob Greaves, and for the place tonight, where Dr. Jones will be joined by Sarah Moorhead of Recovering from Religion and an artist whose name I did not write down, and I don't have it by memory at this point. So we'll be painting live in the studio as well. So it ought to be
Cool.
interesting, ought to be fun. Stick around for both. Bob, what is the topic for your show today?
Oh, I was hoping to get into it in my last show, but I was so busy talking about speaking in tongues.
Oh, that'll
An
be
interesting
exciting.
little
That'll be
approach I gave
exciting.
to it, I think. But tonight we're going to talk about church authority, concepts of church authority. And as you can guess, I'm going to disagree with a lot of that stuff, but I want to talk about it.
All right. Well, I look forward to it. I haven't had a chance to catch your last week's show. It became pretty evident when I said that'll be exciting, and realized that that's what you were talking about. But no, that it ought to be a great show, and I look forward to it. Well, you have a good one. Thank you for joining me, and thank you viewers for joining us. Tune in again next week at 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time for Inspiring Honesty. Have a great week.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. In just a moment, the unconventional pastor will be, who knows, telling us what to do, teaching us to speak in tongues, bossing us around. There's just no telling, but it's bound to be fun.